Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Strategies for Educators, Counselors, and Community Members to Build Protective Factors for America's Muslim Youth. My name is Carissa Rano, and I'm with OJDP's National Training and Technical Assistance Center. As your technical host, I'd like to take a couple of minutes to discuss a few features of the Adobe Connect webinar platform and provide a few announcements to keep in mind. For those of you wishing to download a copy of the PowerPoint slides and other important documents, you may do so by locating the Handouts pod directly above the chat area. Click on the name of the file and then click the download button. At the end of today's webinar, there will be a Q&A session where the presenters will address some of the questions posed during the presentation. Please type your questions into the chat box as they arise. For those of you participating in today's webinar as a group, please take a minute and help us count. Go to the chat window and type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. If you're viewing alone, there is no need to type anything into the chat pod at this time. At the conclusion of today's webinar, you'll be provided with a link to a brief survey about today's presentation. The feedback you provide is useful to assist in future planning and training. Following today's webinar, attendees will be sent a certificate of attendance. The certificate is sent approximately 1 hour following the conclusion of the event and is sent via an Adobe Connect thank you email. Please keep an eye out on your email for your certificate. Finally, this event will be archived in approximately 3 weeks on OJDP's online university at www.ojdpou.org, where you can also view past webinars. Again, thank you for joining us today. I will now turn it over to our moderator for today's webinar, Steffi Rapp from OJDP.
Good afternoon. Thank you. My name is Steffi Rapp, and I'm from the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention at the Office of Justice Programs in the Department of Justice. I would like to thank my federal partners at the Health Resources and Services Administration for assisting with this webinar. I would also like to thank our speakers for taking their time and sharing their knowledge around this important topic. Over the past years, we've seen an increase in bullying and discrimination against Muslim youth. In May, OJJDP hosted a webinar to provide information and tools to prevent bullying of Muslim youth. In this follow-up webinar today, we will talk about strategies to build resiliency and protective factors for this vulnerable population. If you missed our previous webinar on this topic, you will find it available for viewing at ojjdpou.org. Today we will first hear from Dr. Richard Kripke. He is a professor of pediatrics at the University of Rochester. He is board certified in pediatrics and in adolescent medicine. He co-edited a textbook on adolescent medicine published in 1992 and the American Academy of Pediatrics textbook of adolescent healthcare in 2011. Dr. Kripke has received a number of awards for outstanding achievement in adolescent medicine. We will then hear from Dr. Samira Ahmed, who is the director of the Family and Youth Institute, a research and education institute focused on strengthening young people and their families. She holds a PhD in clinical psychology and specializes in American Muslim youth and Muslim mental health. Dr. Ahmed has published numerous journal articles and is the co-editor of Counseling Muslims Handbook of Mental Health Issues and Interventions. Next, we will hear from 2 assistant principals, Lamont Lyons and Robert Butts. Both are located outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Mr. Lyons is the assistant middle school principal in the Chartiers Valley School District. He has 13 years of experience as an educator with 7 years experience working as an elementary and middle school teacher. Mr. Butts has been the assistant principal of Chartiers Valley High School for 3 years and has also worked as a social studies teacher for 6 years. Both of these school administrators will share their successes at developing an inclusive academic culture that ensures that each student has a place to thrive and learn. Finally, we will hear from Dr. Deepa Bandaru, who will discuss the inclusion of Muslim youth in after-school settings. Dr. Bandaru is the lead teacher and program coordinator at the Refugee Women's Alliance, a nonprofit program that provides holistic services to help refugee and immigrant women and families thrive. It is located in Seattle, Washington. Dr. Bandaru holds a PhD in political science. She has taught courses in democratic theory, human rights, and race in the United States. We will now hear from Dr. Kripke. Thank you.
Thank you, Steffi. It is a pleasure to be part of this OJJDP seminar. I'm webinar. I'm looking at the names of the folks who are on the chatting and viewing this with us, and it's a pleasure to be here. What I'd like to start with is the next slide, please. Or do I? Wait a minute. Okay. Yeah. So when we're talking about adolescence, I like to talk about normal stages and tasks of adolescence that really cut across all different kinds of adolescence. So we're not talking about anything that's specific to Muslim youth, but they are very clearly related to Muslim youth. And if we see the four columns there, there's the issue of going through puberty, developing autonomy, developing an identity, and thinking are the key tasks of adolescence. And if we go across, we can see that early, middle, and late by age ranges. And with puberty, we see the onset and the tempo is highly variable. Some kids start very early and go through very quickly. Some kids start very late and go through very slowly, and everything else in between. By the time we're talking about middle adolescence, females are usually advanced from a physical point of view with respect to males. Males can continue to go through puberty and development into adulthood well into the 20s. And then finally, by late adolescence, youth generally have an adult appearance, but we also realize that some kids can have that adult appearance even when they're 14 or 15. Next column over, autonomy. The key point about autonomy early on is adolescents are ambivalent about it. They kind of want to be autonomous, but they also find their family very helpful to come back to if they're having any kind of stress or distress. Getting down into the 15 to 16-year-old, there's a lot of limit testing, experimental behavior. And then when you get down to the 17-year-old, they kind of go back to ambivalence because they realize now I'm on my own, and it is kind of a difficult time for them if they don't feel like they're really prepared for adulthood. The next column over, identity. The first question that young adolescents go through is, am I normal? Then the next question is, who am I relative to other people? Who am I as an individual? And then finally, by late adolescence, who am I in relation to others? And then the final column, thinking. They're concrete operational. That is, they think about the here and now. If they can see it, touch it, taste it, smell it, it exists. But otherwise, it's sometimes difficult to think too far into the future. Middle adolescence is transitional. And then most of the time, by your 17 or 18 years of age, formal operation where they can actually hypothesize things, think about things as they might be, et cetera. So this is just the groundwork for all adolescents. Next slide. So this is a book that I recommend. It's from the Johns Hopkins Center for Adolescent Health, and I included the URL. You can click on that, and it's free to download. It's a wonderful resource for anything related to adolescent growth and development, just for you to have after the webinar. Next slide. So adolescent thinking is an important part of what we're going to be talking about today overall. And one of the key points of adolescent thinking is that the adolescent is very egocentric. That is, there's a lot of narcissistic self-absorption, which is normal. The personal fable is something else, which leads a young person to believe that they're invulnerable, invincible, and it is a difficult time because they really have kind of almost the belief in superhuman powers, nothing bad can happen to me. And then finally, the imaginary audience. This is another important aspect of adolescent thinking. Kind of like everybody is looking at me, they know what I'm thinking. So there's this almost a sense of transparency that they really don't enjoy. Next slide. So just want to talk a little bit about what's happening in the adolescent brain. We've learned a lot about the adolescent brain. There's still a lot more to learn. There's basically two parts of the limbic system, parts of the brain. There's the inner limbic system, the reptile brain. It's the part of our brain that kind of protects us against threats. It makes all of the adjustments that need to be made when there is any kind of a threat without necessarily even thinking about it. We have box there around the word amygdala. Amygdala is a tiny area that really senses threat. And one of the difficulties is if the amygdala senses threat when there's not really a threat, and the cortex of the brain can't really process that, there can be some reactions that might not show much evidence of thinking. Next slide. So the other part of the brain, the frontal and prefrontal cortex, the wizard brain. There's two areas. The medial-lateral frontal lobe is out on the outside, and then on the inside, the ventral medial prefrontal lobe. Only want to point out here that the blue area is kind of the cold cognitions with future orientation and inhibition of impulses, and the hot cognitions, regulation of emotions, weighing risk and rewards, and learning from experience. Next slide. And so this is I think that highlights a lot of what's going on in the adolescent brain, especially early adolescent brain. So if you ask an adult, what emotion do you see in this woman's face? Different than adults, adolescents use the amygdala, the fight and flight response, rather than the frontal cortex, that is the executive function, to read emotions. So adolescents are more likely to interpret misinterpret the facial expressions. So they see anger when many adults see fear. And so, a lot of kids will see an adult maybe trying to express fear, but they say, oh, I'm in trouble because this person's mad at me. And again, anger is a threat that leads to a rapid reptile brain response. And so this is all without really thinking, but it's an automatic kind of a thing related to how we handle stress. Next slide. So there is additional information. This is also available online from the National Institutes of Mental Health. The teen brain still under construction, and it stays under construction probably about 25 years of age. And the key points are that there's a heightened response to emotionally loaded messages and situations. That there's anticipated rewards motivate behavior more than risk-taking or thrill-seeking. That is, we used to teach that if you teach kids the potential harmful effects of something, they won't do it. But actually, whether or not they do it is the potential rewarding aspect of it. There's also age-related changes which shape how different parts of the brain are activated in response to experience. That is, behavior is framed by urgency and intensity of emotional reactions. The reproductive hormones shape sex-related behavior and growth and overall social behavior. Again, the hormone systems are involved in the brain's response to stress. They are also changing. And then finally, reproductive and other signaling mechanisms have complex effect on the brain and behavior. So all of these things are going on with every youth, including Muslim youth, just to kind of give us a background of what's happening inside the individual. Next slide. So another book that I would recommend for those who are interested in what neuroscience is teaching us about adolescent behavior. Lawrence Steinberg is a well-known professor at Temple University. And this Age of Opportunity, Lessons from New Science of Adolescence is a wonderful book. I think especially for anybody who has a teenage child or works with teenagers, this is an excellent resource to learn more about what the practical applications of neuroscience. Next slide. So what we want to really focus most on today is this whole issue of overcoming the odds and the concept of resilience. So we know that cumulative odds against youth are increased by things like poverty, single parenthood, low maternal education, family instability, or health problems. But then there's also the other side of that is resilience, which says basically positive outcomes despite adversity. And the key factors that lead to resilience are having an easy temperament, good language and reasoning skills, friends and interests, and a close relationship with adult role model or caregivers. Next slide. So resilience and protective factors. Next slide. Resilience. Next slide. You can just go through this. Okay, so resilience is the dynamic, innate capacity to bounce back from adversity and protect against so-called risk factors. And it can be learned and developed with the help of others. Protective factors make a more profound impact on life course than specific risk factors, which is a good thing. We often tend to look at risk factors, but what we are now learning is protective factors can have a more powerful influence, beneficial influence, than the presence of any specific risk factor. And then finally, protective factors will transcend ethnic, social, geographical, and historical boundaries. Next slide. So with adolescent development with respect to protective factors, and this again will be true for all adolescents, and even focusing on our Muslim youth, it also applies, that the protective factors tend to moderate or buffer or insulate against and thereby reduce the impact of risk by decreasing the likelihood of negative behaviors when faced with adversity. And the important point about protective factors, these are evident across multiple high-risk behaviors, threats to well-being, social groups of youth, cultures, and countries. So one of the reasons we're very high on talking about adolescent positive youth development is that it does transcend many things that we often will categorize people in terms of. Next slide. So the key protective factors that we've in studies have found connectedness to parents and family, connectedness to other adults and organizations, connectedness to school, and connectedness to school is probably the most important variable outside of the family. Spirituality, and then having optimism and a sense of possibilities. So these are things that we really try to cultivate in developing positive youth development, because they do become protective factors. Next slide. So in this concept, positive youth development is a kind of an approach. It's an intentional, deliberate process of providing support, relationships, experiences, resources, and opportunities to promote positive outcomes for young people. And some folks may be familiar with the work of Karen Pittman, who talks about the 5 C's: competence, confidence, character, connection, and contribution. So to the degree that adults can help adolescents gain those 5 C's, that is the process of positive youth development, intentionally and deliberately. Next slide. Points about positive youth development, again, this is from Karen Pittman's work, is that we need to realize that problem-free is not fully prepared. Also, it shifts the focus away from helping an individual, child, and youth beat the odds towards a full-fledged commitment to change those odds. And as she points out, thinking differently is hard, acting differently is harder, and acting together is still harder. And then finally, the strategy of risk reduction and promotion of protective factors holds the greatest promise. Next slide. So this is the National Research Council and the Institute of Medicine put out this monograph about, well, actually 14 years ago, but the data continue to show that these principles hold true. Next slide. So the key principles of youth development is that you're looking for positive outcomes. You're not just looking at the avoidance of negative outcomes. Also, very important, youth are engaged and they have a voice. The point of positive youth development is that strategies need to be to involve all youth, not just targeted at certain youth. There's long-term involvement, there's community involvement, and the focus is on collaboration. Next slide. So what do settings look like that have positive youth development? First of all, the settings where they practice positive youth development, kids can learn about these things. There needs to be physical and psychological safety. There have to be appropriate structures. That is, you just don't open up a gym for kids to play basketball. You actually have adults there who can monitor things, and if things get out of hand, can kind of bring some order to the situation. There's also supportive relationships and the feeling of opportunities to belong. Belongingness is a very important thing for adolescents to feel like what they do matters. Positive social norms are also practiced there. Support for efficacy and mattering. Opportunities for skill building, and the integration of family, school, and community efforts. So the settings that can pull those things together are very effective in being a positive youth development setting. Next slide. So we did a monograph for the Journal of Public Health Management and Practice supplement. Again, the line at the URL at the bottom will can click on. There's about 16 different articles all about using public health, using youth development as a public health strategy. Next slide. And so how do we engage youth? Because I think an important part of youth development is not adults doing things to kids or for kids. It's working together to figure out what youth want. Key point is that youth need to feel like they make a difference in their community. They need to be able to hang out in a safe and nurturing environment. Remember, kids do best when they're having fun. They can also learn new skills. They get support from their peers and caring adults, and they will feel connected and belong, as if they feel connected and have a feeling of belonging. They're being valued by others and by themselves. They really are able to make decisions. For example, they might run an event or ownership of some kind of a positive youth development activity. And again, they experience success, accomplishment, and recognition. Next slide. So in summary, I think the key points are that normal growth and development are fundamental to adults interacting with any adolescent. You have to understand the normal growth and development. Puberty, autonomy, identity, and thinking can all be on different trajectories in adolescent development. The so-called lizard brain comes online before the wizard brain, which I think makes adolescents vulnerable to doing some things that may not show the best of judgment. Genes and experiences will shape the brain pathways, and also positive youth development focuses on youth strengths and resilience in supportive adult-youth partnerships, regardless of sex, race, ethnicity, culture, religion, or citizenship. Next slide. And this is my hero, Malala Yousafzai. I speak not for myself, but for those without voice, as the youngest Nobel Peace Prize recipient. Next slide. And we're going to hear off now to Samira. Samira, I'm passing it over to you.
Thank you, Richard. And good afternoon to everyone. And also thank you to our federal partners for hosting this very important webinar. It's really important for us to really be able to apply this knowledge that Richard presented, specifically to Muslim youth, because they are right now feeling very vulnerable and experiencing tremendous stress. Just recently, a North Carolina first grader was beaten up on his school bus by neighborhood bullies, calling him a terrorist, and really physically injuring him. And unfortunately, this is not an isolated experience for many young Muslims. What we find is that Muslim children are increasingly being bullied, harassed, and physically assaulted due to the current state of Islamophobia in our country. The Council of American Islamic Relations in California in 2014 found that about 50% of the students in their study reported experience of discrimination. In addition, what we're also finding is that young Muslims and their peers are constantly bombarded with negative media narratives of Muslims. Now, as a result, what's happening is these factors are contributing to poor academic performance, resulting in development of negative self-concept, difficulties with pro-social skills, as well as impacting Muslim students' health and psychological well-being. Now, what we do know is research has shown that children who report real or perceived discrimination are more likely to report mental health symptoms such as depression, ADHD, anxiety, conduct disorders. And so this is really important for us to understand. And then it's also important to realize that while Muslim youth may share a religious identity, that they may have other intersecting identities that may increase their risk. For example, a black Muslim youth may carry the stress of being discriminated for their religion, and they may also experience discrimination due to their racial background. So they may have multiple risks. And while we know that adolescents who report experiencing racism often report more psychological difficulties, we do know that there are certain protective factors that we can build upon. And as educators, either be it school, after school, community programs, colleges, we may not be able to change all the factors impacting young Muslims, but we can have a profound impact on mitigating these risk factors through protective factors. And we also know that from the research that parents, neighborhoods, educators, peers, these can all serve as protective factors against risky behavior. And so part of what we want to do now is really go through, oops, sorry, moved it a little too quickly. Just kind of a reminder of what Richard talked about. In order to build resilience, we need to have healthy beliefs and clear standards to ensure the physical and psychological safety for Muslim children. So these are beliefs and standards for teachers, students, peers, young Muslims. We need to be clear about that. We also need to increase bonding and attachment of young Muslims to their families, schools, peers, and community groups. And we need to provide them with opportunities, skills, and recognition. So the rest of this presentation I'll be sharing different ideas that could be implemented to help us promote resiliency amongst Muslim youth along 3 specific areas. 1 is increasing safety. 2 is strengthening relationships. And 3rd is the opportunities to belong. And I believe that the other speakers are going to be talking about these factors as well. Okay, so when we talk about increasing safety, given the realities of Muslim youth, we need to begin by ensuring their physical and psychological safety. In the previous webinar, we touched on this topic, so I refer you back to that webinar, and it's available in the PowerPoint handouts and resources if you look in your resources. Now, in terms of individuals and families, parents, schools, and communities should talk to Muslim students about any issues, concerns, and reinforce that they as adults are interested in well-being. Because one of the findings we found from research is that young people often don't report any issues of safety because they don't think the adults in their environment are going to do anything about it. So really talk to them about different types of bullying and what microaggression is. For those of you who are not familiar with this term, it refers to the subtle but offensive comments directed at a minority group that are often unintentional, but they still have a negative impact on the individual. And so really talk to them, well, what are the different types of bullying? What does microaggression look like? How does it make them feel? And parents and religious communities can brainstorm and role-play different ways to handle these difficulties, these different situations, to empower young people. You can also empower them by educating them about their rights as students. And in your resource, you'll find there is a little pamphlet on Know Your Rights as a Muslim youth at school. And so you can print that out and share it for students who you may be working with. Now, for schools and after-school programs, we really need to have a clear policy on bullying in class, outside of class, in cyberspace. Now, it really needs to be communicated to both teachers and students, and so that everybody knows what are the standards of your environment, your educational environment. A number of research studies have found that sometimes teachers are creating an unsafe classroom environment. And this may range from outright discrimination to more subtle forms of biases that are expressed through microaggressions. Other researchers have found that teachers with negative perceptions about Islam often perpetuate negative associations to their students, which creates a hostile educational environment for Muslim students and impacts their academic achievement. So it's really important for there to be an ongoing training for school staff on how to identify personal biases and how they may impact the students and their connectedness and achievement, because these are factors that really serve as protective factors for young people. In addition, when incidents or events in schools, the community, or the news occur, that may cause Muslim students and their parents to feel vulnerable. Schools can take an extra step to ensure the physical and psychological safety of their families. For example, they can reach out to Muslim students, their parents, or the local Muslim community and affirm that the physical and psychological safety of their child are of concern to the school. And if there's anything that can be done to help ensure that they let you know. That extra step builds trust and results in people feeling more comfortable and having that stronger school-parent connection to really help promote development. Similarly, communities, either religious communities or ethnic communities, can hold workshops and seminars helping parents to understand their child's rights in schools and the importance of school engagement to help promote development. And so, in addition, I wanted to remind people of the webinar that we presented last time, in which it goes through and highlights when incidents do occur, what can families and communities do to help support and strengthen young people. So I refer you to that as well. Next, when we talk about strengthening relationships, developing positive and supportive relationships between young people and their parents, peers, schools, and communities are extremely important. So for parents, realize that the parent-child relationship is one of the strongest protective factors for all youth, including Muslim youth. And we see this time and time again in the research that we've done at the Family and Youth Institute. We know from the research that parental mental health, behaviors, and values that are communicated and the degree of family connection can help promote Muslim youth development. Now, in order to help parents with implementing these protective factors, the Family Youth Institute, which is the organization I'm the director of, offers parents free email service with daily resources on how to understand their child, how to strengthen their skills, how to develop a supportive relationship, and really how, all the different factors that you need as a parent to strengthen that relationship. And so this resource can be accessed by our website, www.thefyi.org. Research are clinically based and practical for parents, educators, and often explores topics and issues that are very specific to the needs of Muslim parents and educators. So, and if individuals are needing certain resources, you can always email in and we can provide that information to you. Secondly, for schools, when schools have psychologically safe learning environments, it opens the doors for young people to communicate and build meaningful relationship between Muslim students and their peers. And so I want to highlight a few resources, such as Tolerance.org and Islamic Network Group. Both have age-appropriate material that schools can integrate into their curriculum and engage in conversations that can result in greater meaning and understanding. Now, these interactions with peers, when they're facilitated by educators, can help students challenge their own biases, increase their curiosity about each other, their numerous intersecting identities, while at the same time see each other's similarities and shared experiences, which can build greater understanding and connection. Now, nurturing a sense of connection and belonging with peers serves as a protective factor and creates opportunities for peers to connect outside of the classroom. We also know that a positive student-teacher relationship leads to increased student engagement and achievement, which is, again, another protective factor. So for educators to realize it's really the little things that will matter most for students. So we have to ask ourselves, do we as educators communicate care and concern for our students? Do we listen and appreciate the student for who he or she is? And so simple acts like acknowledging and supporting religious holidays, who their identity is, celebrating with them, partnering with Muslim students to address accommodation needs for Friday prayers, moving exams around holidays or dietary requirements. These little things really make the world of a difference and can really increase connection to the school and as you as an educator. Another factor that serves as a protective factor is a strong parent-school relationship. Schools with large populations of Muslim students, particularly those for whom their English may not be their first language, such as large refugee populations, they may have cultural and language barriers. And so for these specific groups, schools can set up parent involvement boards to help engage parents in their respective language, to help them navigate the American educational system and increase student achievement. And so when schools have done this, we find that their students and parents are more connected to the school and the community, and they report greater trust and greater overall student achievement. And so when parents believe you care about their child and their community, they're more supportive, more involved, and willing to help strengthen that connection to the school. In terms of communities, Muslim students may be part of multiple communities, and research has found that if young people who report experiencing racism often report more psychological difficulties. However, those students who use cultural resources, such as their racial ethnic identity, religious coping, or religious support, report less psychological difficulties. So religious communities should engage in identity-enhancing programs and help foster a sense of connection to religious institutions. Communities can, in terms of resources, communities can also invite organizations like the Family and Youth Institute to provide training on how to develop such programming, as well as provide families with parenting and family strengthening trainings and opportunities to increase family connection. And then finally, in terms of the final area that I want to talk a little bit about is opportunities to belong. That was another area to really help strengthen resilience. And what we find is for individuals, for young people, for young people to really help them feel connected, it's really important for us to understand some of the additional challenges that the young Muslim students may be experiencing. Oftentimes, young people are questioning about their loyalty. Muslim Americans are questioning, are you loyal to the United States? And so that erodes your sense of belonging and connection. So if Muslim students are aware of their history and it's reinforced by their parents, schools, and communities, then it serves as an additional protective factor. And so in your resource, I've highlighted, I've left a resource entitled Muslims in the Making of America. And what that does is it really highlights the long-standing history of Muslims in the building of America. And what that does is to reinforce the identity that, yes, Muslims can be part of American society, and we've been a part of the building of our nation from the beginning. And that really helps to strengthen young Muslims' identities. And so for parents, it's also important to model and create opportunities for the family to belong to wider society. So when parents model such involvement, young people are more likely to follow suit. Similarly, schools, sometimes Muslim students may not participate in activities due to parental or religious concerns. So if schools notice that this is happening, it's really important to reach out to young people and problem solve to figure out what they can do to involve Muslim students. The students may not participate in school dances due to religious requirements, but perhaps schools could brainstorm with students about alternative social activities that would help increase school sense of belonging with their peers. And in terms of communities, neighborhoods and community-wide events that are family-centered without alcohol really help create opportunities to belong. Communities can specifically ask for individuals from the Muslim community to participate in planning a city and township programming. Some communities have father-daughter camping, kids drive-in movies, food events, et cetera, things where Muslim families can get involved and feel like they're part of the greater community. Young people that are connected with their neighborhoods, communities, have better outcomes, are healthy and more resilient. And so these are some examples of ideas that you can implement. And I wanted to highlight a final resource that you can find in your handouts, and that's the State of American Muslim Youth Report, which we published. And that provides more additional information for those who are interested about the challenges and issues facing Muslim youth, as well as opportunities for intervention. Now I'm going to turn it over to Lamont Lyons, who will share about how their school integrated some of these ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Samira. It's actually Robert Butts. I am, as you're looking at your screen, the guy on the right. Lamont is also here. He is the guy on the left. We're going to talk to you a little bit about our district. Chartiers Valley School District is a suburban district of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And by the numbers, we have a total number of students district-wide of about almost 3,300. Of those 3,300, a little over 27% of them receive a free lunch, and a little over, about 3.5% receive a reduced lunch. We do also have 2 homeless students in our district, and our district runs the gambit of the socioeconomic background, ranging from the very rich to, obviously, the 2 homeless students that we have. The high school, by the numbers, we have a total number of students of 1,066. Of those students, you see a breakdown there in front of you. So the job that we have to do here at the high school is assimilate every group that we have together, and it can be a daunting task at times. At the middle school, Lamont's going to discuss that a little bit.
At the middle school, we have 728. I thought we had a little more, but we have about 728 students. And our demographics is similar to the makeup of the high school. So if you look at the high school, like the middle school, we're very similar. We're actually one campus too. I don't know if Robbie had said that, but we're one campus. So the middle school and the high school are at one campus, and we're just divided by a few hallways. So we're very connected with one another and work a lot together with our students.
One of the things that we really look at when we work to build an inclusive environment is the 2 schools below us. We have a primary school, which is made up of kindergarten, 1st, and 2nd grade, and we also have an intermediate school, which is made up of grades 3, 4, and 5. At these 2 schools, we have something called the School-Wide Positive Behavior and Intervention Support Program. What this does, it serves to build a common language, and these students begin to hear a lot of the same words in the primary school, then it's reinforced again at the intermediate school. So when they come to the middle school, it's not words that are brand new, and they are able to actually continue with the program as it's set up. In the past, we have used something called the Ovea's anti-bullying program, and the bullying program itself is normally for K to 8. We modified it here at the high school to fit the needs that we had. This past year, each school in our district became designated as No Place for Hate schools, and this is something that is, it gives us a foundation and a framework to work through that comes from the Anti-Defamation League. So whenever we look at what Lamont and I do, we actually have to give a lot of credit to what our primary school and intermediate school do because they lay the foundation for the programs that we use here at the middle school and the high school. So some of the programs that we have, I'm going to let Lamont talk about this.
So the programs and initiatives that we are incorporating. Robbie had spoken about our SWIBIS program, so to establish a culture of inclusion, respect. That started at the primary level. We have that within our intermediate, and now we have it at our middle school level. Reward students for being thoughtful, showing respect to peers, adults, the school. We have respect, responsibility, and integrity at the middle school. So respect for each other, for yourself, integrity, and also responsibility. So we phase that into our classrooms. We phase that into our hallways, our restrooms, our buses, our cafeteria. So these are all of the phases have been implemented in year number 2 of this program. So this is a common language that Robbie had spoken about, that it's a connection. It's a fluid, from the primary, intermediate, up to the middle school. And once they leave us in 8th grade, they move on to the high school. So we want to continue that continuum all the way through. We have No Place for Hate, combating hatred, bigotry, and bullying. And we are focusing this year a lot on student-driven activities. We've had a few student-driven activities last year, but we want to focus more on the students. You provide the input. You come up with some of the ideas. Us as adults, we'll support you. We'll make things happen. And if we have to modify and tweak things, so be it. But we want students to, they have the ideas. This is their school. We want them to engage in this process as well. And also providing that safe environment. We want to have that safe physically and emotionally, providing the supports that are appropriate for students, and not just students, but also their families. The safety and security of this school, you have to come to a safe place to learn, and we want to make that for our youth an inviting opportunity.
Whenever we talk about promoting equality for all, we have to look at our Chartiers Valley School District strategic plan. And every 5 years, we renew or rewrite the plan, and this comes directly from that. It's on our website, www.cvsd.net. And it states diversity will be student-driven. And the idea behind this, and Lamont just touched on this, is that programs and activities will come from students, and this actually gives students buy-in as they start to plan and implement some of the things. And Lamont said we give them the opportunities and the resources that they need, but it comes from them. No Place for Hate, again, from the Anti-Defamation League, actually gives us that framework that we work with, and this year's theme is going to be building relationships. We believe that last year getting started in the program, we were able to actually recognize bias and bigotry. This year we want to move past that and more into a positive building of relationships. And finally, when we talk about equality for all, we want to also build some global connections to customs and traditions. And one of the things that we do here at the high school, and I know the middle school is starting to branch out and do some of this, is our Spanish club and our French club will actually have Skype meetings with students from Spain and France. And this is done usually in the morning for us because it would be evening for them over in Europe. And it gives our students an opportunity to see a Spanish birthday party, or even coming up on at the end of this month, El Dia de los Muertos. It gives them an opportunity to see some of the traditions that go on with that. Also here at the high school, we have something called an advisory period. And this is, it's a one period every 2 weeks that's designed to give students at the school someone with whom to connect. And when we say someone, we typically want it to be an adult, because this gives that individual student an opportunity to actually sit down and share things that, well, they may not be open and honest with their parents about. It gives them that extra resource. Meetings are held twice a month with different themes for each month. And last year, we did the 7 Habits of Highly Effective Students. This year, we're continuing to build on that. And again, the theme coming out of everything that we're talking about here today is building the relationship. Building relationships, excuse me. And teachers have embraced this because it actually helps to build a climate of equality. It gives students an opportunity to go into a class and sit down and talk about some things that might be on their mind. And the interesting part about it is the things that they'll discuss aren't in a curriculum. They are things that are in real life. Our Student Services Department has begun to conduct groups. One of the such groups that they have is something called Lunch and Learn, and this is similar to advisory in the sense that it gives students an open forum to share concerns and share ideas with each other. We have something called a Student Assistance Program, which is designed to aid in the removal of the barriers of education, and these could be a number of different things, ranging from drug and alcohol abuse to feeling bullied and ostracized. And No Place for Hate is the framework that we use. And here at the high school, we had something called a No Place for Hate Week, which was dedicated to different parts of the initiative. And one day we had a nationality day. And we planned this right along with our English as a second language teacher, because what that teacher will do is have what is called their nationality day, where students who are in the program, who are English language learners, will have an opportunity to bring in food from their culture and other different things along those lines that actually give them an opportunity to share, and we're invited to it every year. We also had a positive message day, and this is where students wrote positive messages on Post-it notes and gave them to each other and left them on lockers. So what we do at the high school and what we do at the middle school is actually one of the biggest things that we do is hold people accountable. And in a minute, Lamont's going to talk to you about building a safe and inclusive environment, but I have 2 more things that I want to share. The first of these is our school newspaper. We try and branch out to different types of people and faith and other things that we have here at the school. And we had a female Muslim student actually write an article about having a dance simply for female students only. And it was interesting because before we had our webinar here today, I was trying to find her to get some of the ideas that she had so that I could share them with you. But the article basically states that she wants to have a dance with female students because as a Muslim female, she is unable to go to a dance with a bunch of boys. So that's one thing I'm going to actually look at maybe implementing with this individual student and the Muslim population that we have. Another example was a little bit of ethnic intimidation that took place here last week. And I know we have a lot of programs in place, and we're working very hard just about in every school to combat all of this. But I had an individual student say to a Muslim student who was wearing the hijab that he was a suicide bomber for the United States. Obviously, this violates our code of conduct, and the student was held accountable accordingly. So even though we do have a lot of these programs and a lot of the good things that we are doing are working really well, we still have to make sure that we hold students accountable when they do violate the code of conduct and they step across that line.
So building that inclusive environment, climate and prevention, preventing the problem behaviors, intervening appropriately is one step. Deliberate efforts to create positive climates, promoting social and emotional learning, as well as their academic, which was touched upon, their academic skills, and encourage positive behavior, which we do through our SWIBIS program, and providing training and supports to our school personnel on how to engage students and support positive behavior. Something I would like to touch upon with the climate and prevention, it should be proactive before incidents do occur, so we're not following up on the back end of things, whether it be anti-Muslim or otherwise, so that the students understand that this language of bias and the distinction between these two different concepts. We definitely want to be on the front end of things. We don't want to be behind the eight ball. We want to get that message out. We have our days which correlate with what Robbie talked about, advisory. We have it's called PBS days, Positive Behavior Support Days, and we follow that same schedule as the high school, 2 times a month. It's bi-weekly. But we use these to touch upon current events. We use this to touch upon how to appropriately interact with one another or to speak with one another, using real-world incidents to discuss in an open forum. We have an extended homeroom period on those days. So we have that half an hour at the front of our schedule where we construct, students and our teachers construct presentations, activities for our whole school to take part in. We want to make sure that we also encourage students to learn to be an ally. And it's not just being an ally by speaking up, but being an ally by not even participating in the disrespect or supporting a student that's being bullied. We also want them to get to know people better rather than just using the judgments and maybe some biases that they have learned along the way. So we use that as an effort to combat a lot of the hatred and bigotry that we see in our world today. Clear, appropriate, and consistent expectations, consequences, as Robbie touched upon. We have discipline and policies and codes in place, and we need to make sure that they are clear and appropriate, and we have to apply them consistently according to our expectations. And consequences that do occur through these. We also want to set high expectations, and that's what our SWIBS program is. We have these expectations. In our cafeteria, they're posted. We have them posted in our hallways. But these are the expectations that our students are to adhere to, and we hold them accountable for. But that common language, that common part of our culture, kids know when they hear Triple Crown. That's our specific name for our SWIBS program. We call it the Triple Crown program. They know what the Triple Crown means: respect, responsibility, and integrity. And also, what's touched upon before too, involving the families. It's very important. It's very it is imperative that we have these families connected. And a situation that I had last year where a Muslim student was called a towelhead because of the hijab she wore. And she was a student who would never really report things. She just kind of let it roll off her shoulder. But it really wasn't rolling off her shoulder. It stuck with her. So a student, an ally, actually spoke up for her last year and reported the incident to me. So then I investigated and handled it accordingly, but I made that connection with the family. I made that connection with the student. And in any situations or anything thereafter, she was very forthcoming in giving me information on or telling me what was going on. So she found that that comfort level, that relationship that I was really deliberately trying to build, and equity and continuous improvement. We want it's equitable here at the school and in our building, safe staff capacity, and continuously evaluating. We want to evaluate our policies, our practices, our initiatives that we are setting forth. We want to make sure that they are fair and they promote achievement for all students, academically, behaviorally, emotionally. Next week we have a training actually for our staff members that we are going to be conducting here through the Anti-Defamation League. We have about 40 participants, staff members, students, and parents that are going to be trained on, the diversity, this diversity training. We want them to know that this is a message not just school, but it's community-wide. We want to make these community connections with, not just within our walls, but throughout the community, that this is a no place for hate zone. We celebrate diversity, we celebrate differences, and that's just not going to be tolerated, here within our school and within our community. So we have to have these clear, appropriate, and consistent expectations, consequences. we're not looking to consequence, but if students do cross the line and violate, that is something that we definitely, we take seriously, and we want to make sure that students and staff, they get the message that we're an inclusive environment. And I touched upon some of these in my previous conversations about what we do here. And I do have one last thing to note that last week we had we're building a new school here, and we have some focus groups that we want to pull from, our community members, our students and staff. But last week we had a student focus group, and they went around writing ideas and Post-its, and we just had a big gallery walk where they were doing things. And one thing that came out, and again, it was student that came out, but they want to have a cultural day. They thought it was a great idea to have a cultural day. A neighboring district does a big cultural day, a neighboring district outside of Pittsburgh here, and I saw this last year, and I never said anything to anyone else, but it was funny that this student, out of her own brain, out of her own mouth, out of the pencil, she wrote down to have a cultural day here, and I really think that is something that's important, to celebrate culture, to celebrate our differences and our similarities. So we really believe in that student-driven and student focused approach. And now I would like to return this over to Deepa Bandaru.
Hi everyone. My name is Deepa Bandaru, and I work at the Refugee Women's Alliance, which is a nonprofit organization in Seattle, Washington, so I'm coming to you from the West Coast. And the organization that I work with has been around for the last 30 years. It's a community-based organization that was started by refugee women to respond to the needs that refugee communities face in the United States. So a little bit about the program I run. So it's a youth development program. So the organization has a number of wraparound social services, and we have a youth program, and I'm the lead teacher and coordinator for one of those programs. The program is funded by the city of Seattle with taxpayer dollars, but it's not a lot of funding. So I mean, my purpose here is to encourage some of you to incorporate some of the practices that I'm using on the ground. You could probably get something started for maybe $10,000, $20,000. So my program is running right now like on a $40,000 budget, which is not huge, and we're able to serve almost 100 students a year. So it's pretty effective. Over 90% of the youth we serve receive free or reduced lunch, so most of them are low income. Over 50% are Muslim youth, and most of them are from East Africa, so Somalia, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Djibouti, some of them from Sudan, and most of them are also ELL students, English language learners. And we provide services during both the school year and the summer. So during the school year, it's an after-school program, and in the summer, we offer a 5 or 6 week summer program. The nice thing about working in a community-based organization as opposed to in the public school system is that we have a lot of flexibility to meet the needs of the communities that we serve. So for example, when Ramadan falls in the summer, we've been able to change our summer schedule to allow students to not come during that time and to run our summer program after the fasting season is over, and they're able to be more alert and participate more fully. So these are the nice things about doing something a little bit outside of the school system. So as far as after-school programming goes, the focus can be a lot of things, and the focus of our program includes all of these things: providing academic support, college and career readiness, leadership development, socio-emotional development, community attachment, and recreation. And all of these things are going to enhance the protective factors for youth and for Muslim youth. So that's really what I'm going to be focusing on. So I will also wanted to mention a resource. Some of you may have heard of it, some of you may not have, but there's an initiative called the Youth Program Quality Initiative, YPQI. It was spearheaded by the Weikert Center. And it's basically a guideline. You can find it online, YPQI. It's basically a way to measure the quality of youth programming. So if you're interested in starting a youth program or starting some kind of teen group or a Muslim student association or a student of color association, something along these lines, you can use this as a guideline. And there are 4 elements to the Youth Program Quality Initiative. The first one, which is the very bottom, the basic thing that all youth require, is a safe environment. And then we're looking to create something more supportive, so creating more belonging, a welcoming environment, enhancing interaction between youth, among youth, and then also between youth and adults. And finally, youth programs that are high quality incorporate some element of engagement, involving the youth in actually planning, making choices, reflecting, maybe organizing an event or something along those lines. So we try to use this as a guideline as we're developing programming for youth. Our goal is to incorporate youth voice and youth choice as much as possible, to have youth-centered programming. Next slide. So in all programming, it's really important to establish a culture of trust and openness. So the trust and openness is really important among youth. It's also really important among youth and the adults that they're working with, whether they're teachers or counselors or even volunteers. So the youth that I work with, I have a majority of Muslim youth. They don't always report cases of bullying. So the youth that I've worked with have experienced bullying in school. They've experienced bullying even in my program. And sometimes they're reluctant to report that. And that has a lot to do with trust issues. So it's really important from the get-go of establishing a program to also establish a culture of trust and openness. So there are a few strategies that I wanted to share with you for how you can do that in an after-school or outside of school context, or even an in-school context. So the first thing is community agreements. So creating community agreements with youth, so gathering youth, having them share their goals, why they're coming to this particular program, and then having them share the sorts of expectations that they would have for themselves and one another in order to achieve those goals. So you're going to come out with things like, mutual respect, listening, no put-downs, no judgment. But the main thing is that those agreements should be youth-driven. You want all of the youth to buy into that from day one, so that as the days move on and more stresses arise and more conflicts arise, you can always point to those agreements. You have them posted somewhere in the space so that youth know there was a point where I agreed to these things, and maybe today I'm not feeling so great, but yes, this is something that I agreed to, and this is the environment that I want to be part of, and so it helps to mitigate conflicts and to resolve things that might come up over the course of, let's say, a school year. The other thing is using weekly community circles to check in and reinforce program culture. So in addition to maybe having a kind of ground rule setting session early on when you start a project or a program, so let's say it's a school year program or even a quarterly program or semester-based program, whatever it is, you start with ground rule setting, but then weekly or very regularly you're checking in with the youth and having community circles where youth are playing games, you're doing team building, communication building, and in addition to that, you're reinforcing those expectations and the program culture, the anti-bullying culture, the culture of inclusion. So as conflicts come up or as insecurities start to surface, youth feel like they can share those things. They can share those things with one another. So for example, if there's a bullying incident, if there's a fighting incident, there are ways to try to talk through that in the context of a community circle where you're trying to heal the wounds that might have emerged in the context of your program, or even starting to heal the wounds that are emerging in the larger social environment. So for example, students may feel threatened as a result of certain things that are happening in the larger national climate. And so you're creating a space for them to talk about that and for youth to support one another. So for example, last fall after the San Bernardino shooting, a lot of the youth that I work with were feeling extremely threatened. A lot of the high school students, the Muslim students, were feeling really threatened. They were feeling that, you know, people were looking at them differently. There were actual cases of some physical violence, physical aggression. And so so they came to program, and some of them were sharing these things, and it was really wonderful to see the non-Muslim students coming up and saying, hey, that's not how that's not what most people think about Muslims. You know, this isn't something we support in our program. And I just think that youth to youth conversation really fostered some kind of healing, I think, and it changed the tone for the rest of the school year. There was this sense that this is a place that's supportive. We can't control completely what happens in the outside world, but at least we can control what happens here, and we're going to support one another here. Next slide. So I would also say another important aspect of establishing a culture of trust and openness is to encourage program staff to learn more about the home cultures and religions of program participants. So if you have, so depending on who you have, that you have to learn about where they come from, and to try to be conscientious about the particular needs of those participants. So in the case of Muslim youth, some of the things that I've done is I've actually brought leaders from the local Islamic community to come and talk with staff to share some of the basic things that staff should know when working with Muslim youth. So things like diet, what's halal, what are the sorts of foods that Muslim youth can eat, and what are the kinds of things that many of them, not all of them will follow this, but that many of them won't be able to eat. Knowing when prayer time is, and trying to provide a space for youth to pray. I mean, these things, what Samira was saying about the small things that you can do, providing a space to pray. Making sure that you have halal food. If you're organizing a picnic or a barbecue, going that extra leg of finding the halal butcher and getting halal meat. All of these things just exponentially expand trust between the sort of mainstream and minority communities, whatever communities those might be, and in this case it's Muslim communities. So another thing, modesty in dress. So that's another thing to know. I think about a lot of Muslim students. There's this stress on modesty in dress, and going along with that, modesty in relations between genders. So making sure that when you're organizing activities in an after-school context, that there's not the requirement for boys and girls to touch. There's not the requirement for boys and girls to necessarily be physically active next to each other. Always providing an opportunity for some kind of alternative plan, that you just being conscientious of that, because you don't want to put the youth in a difficult position where they feel like they have to explain themselves to an authority figure. I've definitely made mistakes before where that's happened, and I've learned from that, which is to say that, I think a lot of educators, we look to the youth that we work with to explain things to us. Oh, why do you have to do this? Why do you pray 5 times a day? Why do you do this or that? And I think it's always better as educators, as mentors, to try to find the information on our own, whether it's through our own research or by involving adult allies. So that could be leaders in a Muslim community, that could be religious leaders, community leaders, and having them explain things to your staff, to your colleagues, so that you're not overburdening youth, because the youth are already going through a lot, and they don't need to be your teachers in addition to what they're dealing with as youth. So and finally, Ramadan, as I mentioned before, knowing when Ramadan is, knowing about sort of fasting times, and seeing if there are ways that you can accommodate youth during those times. Next slide. So finally, and I think this is something that a lot of people have mentioned, finding ways in programs to celebrate and explore home cultures and religions of participants. So things that we've done in our program, we've had multicultural nights where youth from different communities are able to display aspects of their home cultures. We've held youth showcases. So youth showcases may involve some cultural element, but they're also just opportunities for individual youth to express themselves through, let's say, spoken word poetry, or through photo presentations or videos that they've made. And a lot of times in those artistic presentations, you'll see Muslim youth channeling some of their frustrations about, discrimination and Islamophobia. And it's a really great opportunity for them to share their experiences, and it's a really great opportunity for others to really understand what they're going through and to create that supportive environment and say, this is a place where your voice is valued, this is a place where your perspective is valued, and we are here to support you. And of course, recognizing special holidays, but I would really encourage, as also as a student who was once a minority, holidays are just the tip of the iceberg for being that diverse society that, we as Americans want to be. I think it's really important to go even further to incorporate the voices of individuals, to recognize that, that cultures and religions are not monolithic, that every individual, every Muslim American, for example, experiences Islam in his or her own particular way, and to try to give as much space to individual youth to express themselves and not just, through this one sort of holiday. Okay, next slide. So finally, I just wanted to share a few of the strategies, the other strategies that I've used to build protective factors for Muslim youth in my program. So these are all images of youth that I work with. And so one of the first things that I think, after school or out of school programming can do is to provide opportunities for community service. So some of the things that I've done with Muslim youth in the community are, volunteering at our local food bank, volunteering at our local community farm. So they're learning about organic farming, they're gardening, they're hanging out outside, they're eating fresh food, visiting senior centers and volunteering with seniors, helping out seniors, doing forest restoration projects, and cooking meals for homeless members of our community. So when you provide these opportunities for community service, you're providing opportunities for youth to hang out together, for them to have fun together in small groups. Those groups may be like religiously mixed. So again, you're giving them opportunities to engage with one another. You're also helping to, to explode a little bit the outside community's perceptions of Muslim Americans. So, I've taken youth into spaces where, maybe they've never seen a girl wearing a niqab before. Some of my students wear the niqab, the full face veil, and some of them wear the hijab, and some of them don't wear any head covering. And so, and they're saying like, wow, these kids they're just regular kids. They're joking around. They're taking selfies. They're, helping out in the kitchen. They're doing all this stuff. I mean, yes, they are kids. And so I think part of it is, to create that interaction between the youth and the community. And then the other part of it is for the youth themselves, right, to see that, wow, maybe when they're on their own riding the bus, it's scary. It's scary. It's intimidating, given, all the rhetoric that's out there. It can be really intimidating to ride the bus and feel like everyone's staring at me. Nobody trusts me. But then they ride the bus with the group, with the supportive, youth program group, and they have a very different experience. And that's going to help them the next time they get on the bus alone. That's going to build that resilience and that protective factor for them. So community service, I think, has been a really successful element of our program. Next slide. Another thing, kids love to have fun, so providing opportunities for recreation. So again, when you're providing opportunities for recreation, I think it's really important to keep in mind the sort of cultural requirements and restrictions with the different youth that you're working with. So as I said, with Muslim youth, with modesty in dress, modesty in relations between genders, these are things that that you should keep in mind. But there are still lots of great things that you can do. Some of the things that I've done, I've partnered with a local circus organization, and we provide circus programming for youth. I do picnics, games. I've taken them to the Humane Society where they've gotten to work with animals. And so just giving them space to have fun together, to go bowling. Again, it's about being out and about with friends. It's about being a kid. It's about having that time to just goof around, to experiment socially in a safe and supportive environment, and to know that, this is our society too. I think that's really the key when you're giving them these opportunities. And finally, and I think this actually is perhaps the most important thing, except it's really challenging, and it's something I think that even adults we struggle with, is giving youth opportunities for advocacy. So in addition to giving them the skills to be able to deal with personal challenges and their personal, how they're going to, I guess, cope with personal challenges, also teaching youth and giving them strategies for dealing with the larger societal problems. So some of the things that I've done is I've organized a Youth Leadership Institute, which went on for 10 weeks and took the students to City Hall, where they were able to advocate for some of the issues that they cared about. So the girls, there was one group of girls who was advocating for the city providing more opportunities for girls-only recreational sites. People talking about police brutality, some of the youth, that was one of the things that they were concerned with. So giving them opportunities to actually meet with leaders, to meet with legislators, to have space time and see that, the society, that leaders are responsive. They're responsive to youth. We can change things to be better, to be more just, to be more equitable. We organize a Refugee and Immigrant Legislative Day through my organization. We always take youth advocates. And every year there's a sister organization that serves Latino immigrants and refugees, and they organize a Day of the Dead celebration, which focuses on social justice themes. And so the youth I work with have always, for the last 4 years since I've been running the program, we've always contributed a display. So they've been able to work together, decide on the theme, design it together. So we've done something about the global refugee crisis, about Black Lives Matter, and this year the youth have decided that the theme of their project is going to be Islamophobia is Un-American. And they're going to be highlighting the contributions of Muslim Americans, talking about or highlighting how religious freedom is an important constitutional right. So again, weaving the Muslim story into the American story and really pushing that and feeling like they're part of it. So all of these things are just great ways to give not only Muslim youth but all youth the resources to feel like they're supported and to feel optimistic about the future, and to basically develop along a more positive trajectory. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks to all of our presenters. You were all very informative, and I'm going to myself walk away with a wealth of awesome information. We now have a few questions we'd like to ask you from the audience. The first question is for Dr. Kripke. Are there any resources you recommend for youth having to deal with angry and fearful adults? Youth that are experiencing emotional abuse, who are constantly on the receiving end of anger from adults.
Well, yeah, and I'm first of all, I really enjoyed hearing everyone else as well, and I saw that question, and I think it's a very important question. I'm not saying that every parent who is afraid only looks afraid. There are obviously parents who are people who are also angry, and I just got to be thinking, this may seem tangential, but the musical South Pacific from Rodgers and Hammerstein, that you have to be carefully taught to hate and fear. You've got to be taught from year to year. You've got to be drummed in your dear little ear. You've got to be carefully caught. And so I think it's wonderful when I'm hearing what's happening, but I'm also wondering, how are we going to get to the adults in these kids' worlds? Because the kids learn to intimidate other kids because they're hearing it go on at home. And I don't have an answer for that, but I really would hope that we could expand this to not just have youth development, but adult development as well. But as far as the question goes, I think there are kids who have angry adults in their life, and that's where the protective factors really become very important. And some kids are very resilient to be able to, they will go to that source of protective factors that helps them be resilient and avoid the risk factors of anger, et cetera. I wish I had a better answer, but great question.
No, thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Kripke. Our next question is for our assistant principals. Do you have an idea of how big your Muslim population is in your community?
Actually, whenever I actually just sent a message to our data person and asked if we kept that information. Because we're a public school, we're unable to actually narrow it down to a number or a percent. But to give you an idea, typically what happens in our district is in our primary school, in kindergarten, first and second grade, we'll have a very, very large Muslim population, and Muslims will move into our district usually for work. They'll stay for a few years, and then they will move out. So whenever it's time for the children to move up to the middle school and then finally the high school, we don't have nearly the numbers up here that we see down in our primary and intermediate school.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Someone had asked what training the assistant principals were using for teachers and parents to go through to make sure that adults maintain the standards expected by students. So can you give the link to everyone for your training that you're going to be providing?
Actually, we found, or actually we were looking up the training. I don't know the specific name. We call it like our diversity training, but if you go to adl.org, there's a link to No Place for Hate. No Place for Hate is under the umbrella of the Anti-Defamation League. So going there will be able to get you that specific information. But we had the training last year, and this is our second time going through it. And it takes about 20 or 30 participants we have through. This year's going to be 40 participants, actually. But it's a very good 2 to 3 hour training. But more specific information can be found on adl.org, and then go to the link for No Place for Hate.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And our last question is there little research on whether or not it is good for students emotionally to have separate English as a second language learning schools or newcomer schools? What are your thoughts on that?
Typically,
anybody can answer.
Oh, okay. I'll give you our little what we do here, and if typically when students move forward and they leave they start in the primary school and we know that they are an English language learner, the state has certain mandates that are set out that we have to follow as far as how these students get educated. Part of that is staff will have to be trained on how to work with students, because we're seeing an increase in a number of students who are unable to speak even conversational English. And that can actually provide some major barriers to education, especially when the staff will speak English as their first language. So over the course of their educational life, they'll continue to be tested every year, and some get exited from the program because their English language ability has actually increased to that point where they no longer need the extra support.
This is Deepa. I was just going to jump in on this. So here in Seattle, we actually have a kind of pilot project called the Seattle World School, and it's a middle school and high school, so it's 6 through 12, specifically for English language learners. It initially started as an orientation center. It was called the Bilingual Orientation Center, where new refugees and immigrants, if they were in the middle or high school grades, would come, and they could spend 2 years before they transitioned into a mainstream middle school or high school. So 2 years ago, they just started, they just graduated their first class, and so it's a small school, but they're pushing, kids all the way through if they want to stay, if they don't want to transition out, or if their language level is too low. So my organization actually partners with the World School, so we have an after-school program over there, and I run my after-school program twice a week actually out of another high school, which is a mainstream high school, but it has an English language development program where students can take all of their classes in that program, but they're still housed in the mainstream high school. So they're walking through the halls with, students who speak English, and they're eating lunch with everybody else, but it's just in their classes that they're with other English language learners. There's very little research right now about the effectiveness of these types of programs, about whether it's better to isolate, students. Anecdotally, I can say that the students who stay at a school like Seattle World School for like more than 2 or 3 years tend to not integrate as quickly. They tend to not learn the language as quickly or the culture. A lot of kids want to get out because they feel that after a while they're not improving. So it's still kind of, I mean, I think that, you know, that's a dissertation waiting to happen for some educational doctoral student, if you know anybody. But I think at this point there's still not that much research done, and maybe in some of the big cities like Seattle we're starting to see these sorts of institutions popping up, but I'm not sure how effective they are in the long run.
Thank you, Deepa. I appreciate your comments. We had a question regarding Samira's strengthening relationship slide. What website can people find that slide at?
So I think you were the person was referring to the resource of the parent resource in terms of articles and research on Muslim youth, and that website is www.thefyi.org. So www.thefyi.org.
Thank you very much, Samira. And our last question, anecdotally, membership in Girl Scouts has developed resilience in young Muslims. Is there any confirmation of this from anyone's experience?
No.
I don't know.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I don't know of any research particularly about that supports that, but I know anecdotally that young Muslim women are participating in Girl Scouts and are developing resiliency and skill set that we can see, but in terms of research, there's nothing there right now.
And
Rich
Cripe, also, I think that all the evidence would point towards it should be, because that is very much a positive youth development kind of an approach. So,
one thing I would say about Girl Scouts that I do know in terms of research is that they've had a really hard time recruiting in the inner cities and among low-income youth. I mean, whether they're Muslim or not. So students of color, it's been still more affluent, white, suburban. And so some of the people I know who are volunteers have worked with Girl Scouts, and they've had a really hard time trying to make inroads into more urban settings where you might have more low-income students. So I think that's just an outreach issue and a trust issue with the organization that could be overcome.
Thank you. Well, this concludes our webinar today. Thank you very much to everyone for joining us. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'd like to take a moment to thank our presenters as well for a great discussion on this topic. We have just a few brief reminders. This webinar will be archived on OJ's